G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Today we're going to talk about a much requested topic and one that I do believe in. It is the first round pairings video. Let's go!
Jordan open. Chicago with the lead. Bryant to Shai.
Not a game. We talking about practice.
LeBron James with no regard for human life. Anything's possible!
Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang!
Curry for three. Wow! Unbelievable! Making it rain in New York.
We the North are now we the champions.
Not the destination, it's the journey. Mamba out.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. And you can find us wherever you get your podcasts or YouTube. If you're listening on the other one, check out us wherever you aren't listening to at Ball Boys Fantasy Basketball. And like we said at the top of the show, guys, we are talking pairings with your first round pick in today's video and podcast. Now, this obviously applies exclusively to category leagues. And I would argue that it probably applies more specifically to head-to-heads, although you can do pairings in the roto side, but it won't be these players. It would actually be a very opposite type of build because in that type of a scenario, you're trying to build on the players' weaknesses and trying to keep your team a bit more balanced. Whereas in this situation, in this video, we're going to be talking about some punt strategies that we can do based on our first round picks. And I'm going to be going through several options that I think are good players to pair with your first round pick and set you out on the right direction for your team build for the categories that will be harder to find later. Prioritizing which players to get early will give you a good nucleus for your team to begin your draft. Now, before we get into it, I did go and talk about this topic with Josh Lloyd on his show a few days ago, and it is a topic that some analysts might push, under the rug a little bit and say it's not that important. And you can be at risk of hyper-focusing on, if you don't get one of these three players on each first-round pick that I put up on the board here, that it's not all lost. And these aren't the only three players you can pair with each player. But this is just my opinion and what I would do personally when I am drafting these players and the players that I would be hopeful to me, as well as my preferred punt strategy for each of these players. You don't have to do this, but I've come to these kind of punt strategies based on what I can foresee the trajectory of the rest of the draft. Okay, so if I don't punt this category, if I punt this one instead, how does my team look if I do it this way? This is just the type of build that with these players I prefer to go into based on categorical scarcity, based on where I can get which stats at what point in the draft. But it is by no means the only way to do it. So I just want to make that very clear. It is just my opinion on what I think is the best. I'm sure I will get some things wrong. There are some players here which might not do as well this season, or players that I'm not considering that might be better fits. But based on ADP and based on what I think the strengths and weaknesses of each players are, this is how we're going to pair them up. What I've also tried to do, last little ramble, and then we'll get stuck into it. I've also tried to pick players that are around the ADP. So, for example, if I'm picking a pick 1, I'm going to get pick 24. But in some situations, I've picked a very optimistic player, which in most cases won't be available, but just in case they're available, they would be a perfect fit. I've put them on the list. So not every one of these players will be guaranteed to be available at the time of your draft. It is quite difficult, especially that second round. It can mix and match. A lot of those guys are quite close in value. So I've tried my best to at least select one that I think will be guaranteed to be there. Maybe one or two that are a little bit optimistic and thinking that they fall to you, but if they are the perfect pairing. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned them in case that they are available and you are strictly adhering to this video and you draft someone else, which I think could have been a better selection. So that's my reasoning. So let's talk about the top 12 players. Number 1, I still have Victor Wembanyama. Make these texts a little bit bigger. He is still my number 1 player, and this is also a good opportunity for me to revise my top 12 because there is some changes that I have made towards the back half of the first round. He's still my number 1 player. He would be the player I would select first if I had picked number 1. And going into this, I would be punting field goal percentage and likely also punting turnovers as well. So based on this, I think the best player you can draft with Victor Wembanyama in the first round, or in the second round to pair with him, is Damian Lillard. If you can get Damian Lillard scoring, his free throw percentage, his assists, his threes, I think that all pairs very, very nicely with someone like Wemby. Obviously, Wemby is so unique in a punt field goal percentage build. He's already got you covered in the blocks and the rebounds category. So you're just going to get someone in this situation that's really going to build on that strengths of that build. One of the elite players in this situation is Damian Lillard. And you can follow it up with back-to-back picks. And Paul George has been very much available in these situations as well. So he's my number 2 guy. If Damian Lillard isn't there, it's obviously not a point guard, but still a very awesome player with lots of steals, good threes, scoring will be solid free throw percentages, and just all around a decent player. I think his assists will rise again this year with not playing alongside James Harden. So I think he's a very slept-on pick, but I would be very happy to draft him at the turn there. And number 3 is Fred VanVleet, which a lot of analysts are drafting in the second round. I think he's a back-end second round, early third round kind of a player to me personally, and perfect for this type of build where you've obviously got poor field goal percentage is the main drag on him. But the only thing with Fred VanVleet, which bumps him down to number 3 here, is I think he's going to be the worst scorer out of these 3. And whilst Wemby is amazing, obviously, he might not be like a 30-point per game guy. He's more like a 25-point per game guy. Whereas, other players like a Luka Doncic or even someone like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, these guys are scoring just a little bit more. So I don't want to be taking, if I have the choice, someone who scores sort of 17, 18 points. I'd prefer to keep my points up a bit higher because we know that is a category that's harder to get later. So that's why Fred VanVleet falls down to the third option of these 3. So preferred punt, field goal percentage, top 3 options to pair with Wemby, Lillard, PG, and Freddie VanVleet. So let's go to number 2, which is still obviously Nikola Jokic. He is my guy here. My preferred punt build with him is blocks. Some people will lean into the punt threes build. I think I'm preferring to punt the blocks because of the weaknesses that the punt block build normally has is the rebounds and the field goal percentage, because you often find it easy to go into a multi-category punt. With the Jokic, you automatically start extremely strong in that build. So your rebounds, your field goal percentage are both really, really high to begin. So you don't have to fear as much of that moving forward. So my number 1 choice would be Paul George in this situation. So Paul George, again, one of the weaknesses of Jokic is the threes. If I'm not going to punt that, I'm going to need someone who puts up a fair few threes. So Paul George is going to do that. I think he can get close to 3 per game. Much similar reasons why I picked him. And different to Wemby, I think Jokic's field goal percentage will offset PG's poorer field goal percentage for someone who's a forward-eligible player. So, slightly different rationale, but we arrive at the same destination. Jalen Brunson is another really good player here. Again, good scoring is really, really important. The assists are strong. Not as many threes as the other 2 on the list, which is probably the only real concern. But with no Julius Randle, I think he's going to be clear-cut the number 1 guy in terms of usage, so I have more confidence in that scoring staying high. And I just think he's going to be a solid, very well-rounded player. Just no blocks. He averages 0.1 blocks, which obviously artificially deflates his value when looking at 9 category settings. So he gets a big boost when you ignore that low category for him. And then Damian Lillard, also on this list. His field goal percentage is a little bit lower down. So not as high compared to with the Wemby team where I was punting that category, but still similar argument to the Paul George. The field goal percentage for Jokic kind of offsets that, so I don't mind that option there as well. So that is how I would organize those players. Number 3 to me is still Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I would take him at number 3 in drafts for head-to-head category leagues. Different if it was a roto, I think, because the playoff schedule for Luka, which we'll talk about in a second, is the reasoning that Shai is here at number 3. But in a preferred punt, I would be punting the threes category with Shai. I think he's the best option in that build because he hits 1.6 threes per game, which is above average. But for a point guard, positionally, I think it's a little bit below what you'd like. So the best option to me is a Domantas Sabonis. Here's an option where I don't think you're going to get Domantas Sabonis falling back to you at pick 20 or 21. Usually he is gone by there, but in some situations I have seen it happen. More realistically, you're going to be looking at someone like Scotty Barnes, I think, in this spot. A player who was a big breakout last year. One of his weaknesses is the fact that he doesn't shoot a high volume of threes, but you're going to start out really, really strong in scoring, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and your field goal percentage is going to be awesome. Free throw percentage from Shai will help offset a slightly below average, I should say, free throw percentage from Scotty Barnes. But I think that, just the counting stats in general are going to be really, really strong here. And when you're doing this punt threes build, often all those big guys are going to jump up in terms of the value. So you still need some guys to give you some good steals and some good assists. So I think that Scotty Barnes ticks that box a lot. We can get some of those big shot blockers later in the draft. And then Devin Booker is there as well. Surprisingly, you probably think that Devin Booker averages a lot of threes. It's actually one of the dampeners on his value that he only averages closer to 2 threes per game. But at this build, we just don't care. But what we do care is that he scores a bunch and he gets a lot of free throws. So the thinking behind this pairing is that obviously you're going to start really, really strong in scoring, really, really strong in free throw percentage. So when you do take some of those guys later in the drafts that don't hit threes, but maybe have a poorer free throw percentage, don't score as much, you're insulated a little bit because you drafted 2 big scorers, 2 big free throw percentage guys at the beginning of the draft, and you can get maybe your more defensive-minded players a little bit later and attack the draft that way. So that's the rationale behind Devin Booker being there at number 3 in terms of those preferred options. But definitely punt threes, I think, is a pretty clear-cut strategy for Shai, and I think a lot of situations you will be able to grab a Scotty Barnes there. All right, number 4 is Luka Doncic. I'm still very happy to punt free throw percentage with Luka. I know he improved it. I know it's at 78, 79%, which is very much league average at the moment. But I think that with this category in particular, it is so hard to catch up good free throw percentage on high volume later. It's still my preferred option to punt it, even though he might be okay. He might even be good. He might even be like above average when you're comparing him to other players such as someone like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or someone like a Steph Curry or even a Nikola Jokic for a center has been better than him. Joel Embiid, when he's healthy, is an amazing free throw percentage guy. So all these guys are just still a lot ahead of him. I still think I'm happy to go that way. And getting a guy who still gives me a lot of assists is really important in this type of build. So I've got some 3 big assist players. Domantas Sabonis is here. Obviously, punt free throw percentage guys. The thing I like about the Sabonis and Luka pairing is that Sabonis doesn't score and he doesn't hit threes either, which are his 2 other major weaknesses, but awesome field goal, awesome rebounds, great assists. Those are the things that will help Luka, and Luka's scoring and Luka's threes will help Sabonis. So they kind of cover up each other's weaknesses whilst both sharing a slight weakness for free throw percentage. All you need to really target heavily is more scoring and then some blocks later on in the build. So Sabonis is my number 1 option. LeBron James and Scotty Barnes are kind of similar-ish type players, and it is really coming down over here. We've got a big storm happening here in Brizzy. Wind's blowing a gale. But anyway, I'll stay focused. LeBron James, Luka, he's like the next LeBron James type of player. The shape of their categories and statistics is very similar, so they kind of match up very well, as does Scotty Barnes. But Scotty Barnes, obviously a little bit less on the scoring and the threes, but similar to Sabonis, you like that threes kind of and scoring kind of taking him up. And the defensive stats that come from Scotty will help Luka as well. So I think those are all very good pairings, and I think. Look, and if it wasn't for the 2-game playoff week, he would be at 3, and I'd like that pairing a little bit more than some of the others, but I think a lot of those, maybe outside of Sabonis, who probably goes a little bit earlier, are usually there and available. Anthony Davis is still my number 5. So my top 5 hasn't changed from the previous video a few weeks ago. For Anthony Davis, I would prefer to punt assists. Now, I did try a bit of a punt threes build in a mock draft that I did a few weeks ago as well. Didn't love how it turned out. It was okay, but it also turned into a bit of a punt threes and free throw percentage build. And my goal is to try and stay away a little bit from that. So my preferred punt is the assists with Anthony Davis. But you'll notice that all the guys on this list are point guards. I like to, when I'm punting assists, lock away a point guard that's going to help me early. And these players are really good point guards because their value, whilst they give you assists, their value isn't completely reliant on them giving you some good assists. So the number one option, I think, is Kyrie Irving. Super efficient, really good, gets you threes, scores a lot, good field goal percentage from a guard, good free throw percentage on high volume, steals are solid. He also blocks like half a block a game, which is pretty decent from that position. So he would be the number one option. Number two option would be Devin Booker. I expect him to lose a bit of assists this year because of Tyus Jones coming over, but we don't care. I still expect him to be close to 28, 29 points per game. The free throw percentage is going to be massive in this situation because whilst Anthony Davis improved his free throw percentage, there's always a little bit of nervousness that comes back down. But if you insulate a little bit of that risk with someone like a Devin Booker who gets the free throw line a lot, I think that is something that could be very, very beneficial. The steals from Anthony Davis, good steals from a center-eligible player, covers up Devin Booker's weakness there. So between the two, between a point guard and a center, you're kind of averaging 1.2 steals per game, which is pretty solid. So I like that pairing. And then Donovan Mitchell, similar sort of story. He doesn't rely on his assists. Garland's there to give you the assist, but he gives you the high scoring, the high threes, which is really important for Anthony Davis, the solid free throw percentage. His field goal percentage is a little bit less than someone like a Devin Booker and a Kyrie Irving, which probably means it's the reason he's a little bit lower, but still 46.5%, half a block is solid again from your point guard eligible player, and you're starting off really strong in steals in this build as well. So that's a really nice pairing that I like there, and a couple of 25 point per game scorers is always nice as well. So that's how I would do it. Again, there are different ways you could go. You could go the punt threes build. You could do something completely different and just go a bit more balanced with Anthony Davis. There's a few options, but that's personally how I would look to structure it. And that's all these videos are. It's just my thoughts. You can disagree with them. Please do so politely. But I love debating. Just do so nicely. Let's talk about number 6, which has changed. Before this was Tyrese Haliburton. I've just flipped them, really. I've gone Giannis at number 6. Just because there's a few less question marks with Giannis this year. Obviously, you've got Pascal Siakam for the full season in Indiana, but I've got Giannis at number 6. Obviously, preferred punt is free throw percentage. It couldn't really be more obvious. Domantas Sabonis is the obvious pairing. That's what I did last year when I did the Industry Pickup League, and I would do it again this year. I'm a little bit nervous about Sabonis with DeRozan arriving, and maybe he gets a little bit less usage, a little bit less assists in his game this year, so got to factor that in. But number 2, LeBron James and Scottie Barnes. Very similar to what I did with someone like Luka. In fact, I think it's the exact same players in the exact same order because it's the same type of build. The only thing you need to be aware with, obviously, Giannis as opposed to Luka is that you're going to have to hunt the threes a little bit more if you want to do that. You could also punt the threes, but then also Giannis's turnovers are quite high as well. So you're starting to get into that 3-category punt, where I'm trying to stay away from. 3 is kind of my cutoff, okay? So if you're doing that one, then you absolutely must look after your points. You absolutely must look after your assists. And all of these players give me really solid assists. Sabonis and Scottie Barnes don't score quite as much, especially Sabonis. So you will have to make up some good scoring in the next couple of rounds after these selections here. So just do keep that in mind if you are looking to punt turnovers, free throw percentage, and threes. You're leaving yourself smaller wiggle room, and you have to be really strong in assists and scoring, which obviously everyone else will also be fighting for as a very common targeted category in the early rounds. So just keep that in mind. Number 7, we do go to Tyrese Haliburton. And this is kind of the drop-off point where after this pick, up to pick 7, I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling good about pick 7. From pick 8 onwards, I don't like drafting pick 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It is difficult, okay? So there'll be some weird names. But pick 7, I'm still pretty confident. fairly happy with Tyrese Haliburton, and I'm punting points in this situation. So he's the guy that I'm going to be going with here. At number 1, preferred option, and this is where it can be a little bit tough projecting because I think this guy's going to be going in first rounds. In fact, we're going to get to a couple picks later. He's going to be in my first round, but James Harden is the guy that if I could just wave a wand and any player, maybe not any player, but any player after this point, if I could put him in my side with Tyrese Haliburton, it would be James Harden. Now, I am projecting that he won't be available, but just in case he is, he would be my number 1 player. You're starting off extremely strong in assists, and you don't really have to worry about that. Plus, you've got great threes, you've got amazing free throw percentage, and you've got good steals, all of which can help you draft some more big man and defensive-minded players later, which in a punt points build, you'll naturally get a lot of those types of players shoot up your draft board. So I'm really trying to look after the threes, the free throw percentage, and the assists early on. And I think with this type of a build, you'll be getting some guys who maybe are good field goal percentage guys later. So James Harden's low field goal percentage doesn't hurt that much. And number 2, a similar type of player build, but with a little bit more risk, a little bit higher turnovers and field goal percentage, a little bit poorer on higher volume, I think, will be LaMelo Ball. He is at number 2, but kind of similar situation with James Harden. Again, though, I could see a situation where LaMelo Ball starts going higher and higher closer to the start of the second round. So he may or may not be available. And at number 3, I've got Chet Holmgren, who I've seen go as high as 13. I think that's too high. But if I could get him in the middle to the end of the second round, I'd be very happy with it. I think he has a chance to potentially be a top 15 player this season. I'm not as worried about Isaiah Hartenstein coming over as maybe some others are. I think he can be a bit more of that Jaren Jackson type shot blocker where I don't think he has to play center to maintain his high blocks. I think he has a lot of room to increase his minutes. He only played 29 minutes a game in his rookie season. It was his rookie season, by the way. So I think he's going to get better. The thing with Chet is that obviously he doesn't score very much. So in the punt points, we don't care. The other thing is that he doesn't give you many steals. He doesn't give you many assists. But with Tyrese Haliburton, that matches up very, very nicely. And the big thing about Chet is he's going to be a high shot blocking player and he won't tank your free throw percentage. Because you're a punt points team, you're not going to have a lot of players that float your percentages. So someone like a Chet who's not going to tank it is another way to make sure that you stay competitive in that category and avoid yourself needing to draft Rudy Gobert or Nicholas Claxton or any of those types of players later in the draft. By getting Chet, you can maybe afford to miss out on those players and maybe focus a bit more on your guard stats and things like that and know that your blocks are covered. The only other thing with Chet is he's not a high rebounding center either. So you will still need to address those rebounds at some point. But maybe you don't have to get the rebounds and blocks. So it just opens up a few more doors in my opinion. So I do like Chet as the third option there to pair with Tyrese Haliburton. Number 8, Joel Embiid. I've moved him up. Moved him up one ranking. I didn't really move him up. I just moved the guy ahead of him down, really. And by default, Joel Embiid moved up. So I am now officially saying at pick 8, I would be drafting Joel Embiid. I think that if he was the number 1 player in fantasy, it would not shock me per game. He was last year. He is so well-rounded that I've got a preferred punt of field goal percentage, ? Because he's a center that averages 53% from the field, which is good. But it's not elite. It's not Nikola Jokic level. It's not Anthony Davis kind of level where he's shooting 59% or 57%. It's good, but it's not elite. And so for his position, I still think he's a really good punt field goal percentage guy because he gives you it's much like a Wemby. He doesn't give you as many blocks, but the free throw percentage is incredible. He gives you solid assists. He gives you 1.1 threes, which is actually his worst category outside his turnovers, but 1.1 threes from your center is not too bad, I don't think. Similar to the Jokic discussion, I'd prefer to go somewhere else and kind of get my threes because they're easily obtainable later. So, who would I prefer to pair with him? Now, Embiid is tricky, right? Because some people are drafting him here. I think this is probably the earliest that he will go. I think there's a chance that he does go later than this. So sometimes he might be at 11 Sometimes he's at 12 or in the second round. So it's hard for me to pinpoint the perfect player. The perfect player to pair with him would be Jayson Tatum. Think about the most safe, boring, but high-value player you can think of in the first 15 picks, and it's Jayson Tatum, right? So you're pairing Joel Embiid, who's the high-risk, high-upside guy, with the guy who doesn't quite have the per-game value, but is the guy, and he could get injured at any point, but at least so far we've seen he's fairly reliable. So Jayson Tatum would be my number one player there. So if you had them on the sort of turn there, maybe you got Embiid a bit late. I don't think Tatum's going to fall to sort of pick 16 or something like that, whatever this would end up being. But if Joel Embiid falls and you get him at the turn, then and Tatum's also there, I think that would be an amazing pairing and a good start to a draft. The next guy is James Harden. Again, similar. I think he's going to start to push up a little bit higher. But again, if you can get them close to the turn, I think that's a really nice pairing. Again, just someone who I feel confident in terms of his value. He's actually been pretty healthy the last couple of years. And I think that the punt field goal percentage in this type of situation would work really, really well. The good threes, the strong assists that come from James Harden really, really works nicely. And Joel Embiid averaging 30 points per game offsets James Harden's sort of lower, maybe about 20 points per game. So between the two, you're averaging 25 points from your first two picks still, which is really nice. And then number 3, I've got Anthony Edwards. Similar kind of argument to the Jayson Tatum. I just don't rate Anthony Edwards quite as highly as Tatum does, as I do for Tatum, I should say. So Anthony Edwards is someone that I don't ever expect to be, well, I shouldn't say that. This season, I don't expect to be a first-round player. He could. I don't expect it. But at least he is someone that feels fairly safe. Young player, plays a lot, has racked up the games played in recent seasons. So there's no sort of injuries with him that we need to be super conscious of. So I think someone like him to pair along Joel Embiid is more of a play. This way you can kind of figure out your punt build a little bit later. Although Anthony Edwards does suit a punt field goal percentage build. And you're starting up with some really strong scoring, some solid assists from two players who are not point guard eligible. So you can sort of grab those punt field goal percentage build players later. And I think you're starting strong with some solid defensive stats and scoring. So those are the players that I would pair. But a pretty tough one to pick, honestly, because of his variance in drafts. Next, I've got Steph Curry. There's a couple of different ways you go with Steph. For the first time, I think you can entertain a punt field goal percentage build, which is not something I've normally said about Steph, but he's getting a little bit older, has a bit more of usage load on his in his hands, a bit more than normal, with players like Clay going and obviously being bad last year. So my preferred punt strategy for him is still assists. I still really like with Steph Curry. Again, he's a good assist player, but he doesn't rely on assists for his value. He relies on scoring. He relies on, obviously, his threes, his elite free throw percentage. He actually rebounds pretty solid for a guard as well. So 5 rebounds a game for your point guard is pretty bloody good. So I would like to pair another player in that kind of vein, Kyrie Irving, with him. And I've got 2 really, really strong point guards that don't rely on, they average 5 assists each, which is not bad at all. But it's not Tyrese Haliburton. It's not James Harden. It's not Nikola Jokic even. It's not Luka Doncic. So when you're comparing them to the players that are also drafted in the first round, who their strengths are assists, they're a bit behind. So getting those point guards sorted, strong scoring, strong efficiency, some really good threes, obviously. And I think you're off to a really good start, and then you can start to pick off those big men in later rounds as well. So I love that as a starting pick. Donovan Mitchell, similar kind of story. Less efficiency, more steals is sort of his game. And LaMelo Ball's more that punt field goal percentage build. So if you wanted to go down that direction, I think LaMelo Ball would probably be a really good one to go and pair him alongside Steph Curry. And you can maybe make it a punt field goal block kind of a build. Just look after maybe your turnovers or your rebounds is definitely going to be a really big one in that situation. At least LaMelo does average solid rebounds, and so does Steph. So you're averaging basically 5.5 rebounds per game with those 2 guards, which is a pretty good start from an out of position kind of stats. So a solid start there. But obviously you've got to be aware of LaMelo's injury history and obviously Steph's age, 2 risk factors that I don't know. Do you want to pair them up together? I'm fine with it, but others might not be. Number 10. This is where I've settled on James Harden. I think James Harden, for me, slots in at number 10 now with the news of Kawhi Leonard and just the builds and things like that I've been coming up with. Again, my number one favorite build in most drafts is the punt points build, and that's what I would like to do with James Harden. If I could start the draft with the LaMelo Ball, James Harden pairing and just be elite at assists early on, similar to the Tyrese Haliburton kind of situation, I would love to do that. I think when you're at the back end of the draft, you've got to take some risks. And obviously, LaMelo Ball has had his injury risks at the past. So you're obviously factoring that in. But I think it's at this stage where I'm just going to try and go for it. And I can get my big guys later who obviously have high field goal percentage and try and offset the poor field goal percentage at that point. But the poor field goal percentage is obviously less than ideal, which is why obviously Tyrese Haliburton is a preferred player and he's drafted much earlier. So you're going to have to be a little bit more conscious of that. And so for that reason, Domantas Sabonis comes into calculations as well. So if I could get a James Harden-Sabonis pairing, Harden's free throw percentage and threes are trying to offset Sabonis's weakness there. They're both bad in scoring, so you're going to concede that. But Sabonis also offsets the poor field goal percentage from someone like a James Harden. Again, a little bit of a turnover thing you've got to be aware of here as well, but when you're punting points, that's naturally going to be a little bit better, so I'm not too concerned about that. Just be aware of the poor threes that you're going to get in the free throw percentage drag that Sabonis gives you, especially in a punt points build where you're not going to have as much volume, but at least James Harden starts you off at that point. So I do really like the Sabonis pairing with James Harden if you're not willing to take the punt on LaMelo Ball. And then similarly, Chet Holmgren, you could do that as well. Similar argument to what I talked about with Tyrese Haliburton. Chet also helps offset a little bit of that field goal percentage issue for James Harden. Not quite as much as Sabonis does, but you get more threes. The rebounds are a bit better in this situation as well because Harden averages more rebounds than Tyrese Haliburton. So the non-elite rebounding from your center Chet situation is not as much of an issue. So, I'm more and more comfortable with going James Harden at 10, even 9. You could argue I'd probably be happy to take him over Steph Curry in certain situations as well. Hell, even 8. You can go as high as 8, honestly. I think I wouldn't go any higher than 8. I think there's a clear top 7. But I could go James Harden as high as that and prioritize this type of a build, which I do really quite like. I've said before, I love the punt points build. I think there's some good value in it. Push comes to shove, I might even consider that if I was in that position. So these sort of 8, 9, 10 guys I think are very interchangeable. The big slider from my last video is Trae Young. He was 8 in my last first round video. I've got him back down at number 11. I think the more I have been reflecting on my shift in trying to avoid punting multiple categories where possible, just takes the edge off Trae Young because you do have to punt multiple categories. You have to punt field goal percentage, and you probably have to punt turnovers, and you're probably also going to want to punt blocks. And in that situation, he's like a top 10 player. Awesome. But if I can avoid that kind of situation, I will. But it's at this point where the options start to get a little bit harder to pick. So he comes in at number 11. Again, similar names. LaMelo Ball is going to be on a lot of these back-end guys because I think he's got some really good value. So he would be there in that perfect sort of punt, field goal percentage, turnovers, blocks, builds. They go hand in hand together. Solid-ish rebounds from LaMelo, but you will need to address the rebounds at some point. Be very, very conscious of that. James Harden is there as well. I think the scoring from Trae helps offset the poor scoring from Harden, so I like that. And then Jayson Tatum, he addresses more of that rebound need with sort of 7 to 8 rebounds per game, plus giving you some of those other really good stats. So, and his field goal percentage is not as bad as the other two players. So maybe you're sort of hedging a little bit more to just a punt blocks build. He's a little bit more well-rounded. Gives you a little bit more ability to not force yourself to go into that triple punt. So if you're not wanting to go into that triple punt, I think Tatum is probably the guy. If you're happy to, then LaMelo Ball is the guy there. So I'd be very happy to grab any of those players to pair with him. Again, around this time of or part of the draft, it's hard to know who's going to be available because this back end of the first round there's a lot of similar guys here. So you'll notice that LaMelo Ball shows up quite a lot because he'd probably be the 13th ranked player on my list. All right, last guy here, Jayson Tatum. We've talked about him with a couple of pairings already. Look, I think he's probably going earlier than this, and it pains me to say because I'm a Celtics man. I don't know. I don't love the build with Jayson Tatum. I don't love his strengths. He is solid. He is good. He's not great. I don't see him improving anything, changing anything. He'll just be solid. So I think the punt is blocks because I don't see that getting any better. His field goal percentage could bounce back, I think. So that's fine. You could also go punting assists. So there's a few options here. Kyrie Irving is sort of the guy I want to pair with him. Kind of a similar type of player where Kyrie's just good. And in this situation, I am probably going a bit more of that balanced build. Just because I don't love... There's no really strong option out there. And I'm kind of delaying that decision a little bit by going with Jayson Tatum and Kyrie Irving, who I think are both top 15, top 13 players, I think, per game in a 9 category sense. And I can decide on a bit of a punt later, depending on what else happens. So I like that build. Steph Curry, if you want to go the punt blocks build, it leaves you a bit of room to not completely be last in field goal percentage. Maybe you want to beat the Wemby team in field goal percentage. I think there's a chance that both these guys can be 46% field goal percentage guys or better, which is not terrible. But if you really just want to go down the blocks and field goal percentage punt build, and maybe turnovers as well, LaMelo Ball is, again, he shows up in this list because I think he's going to have a really good season. And with Jayson Tatum, the injury risk of LaMelo Ball, which, again, I'm not super worried about. It's a rolled ankle, broken ankle. He's fine. He's back up and going. I think it's okay. But if you were nervous, Jayson Tatum's the perfect guy to pair them together because obviously Tatum is perceived to be a fairly risk-free guy, which, of course, is hard to say about anyone because anyone can go down with injury at any point, but based on what we've seen so far, that is the case, or has been the case. So, that is my pairings video. Let me know down in the comments section below, what do you think? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think that first round pairings are dumb? Sure, chuck them in the comments section below. Let me know if you have any other guys. Maybe you think that some of the players are not realistic to get back to at that point. I can definitely see the argument for that. I'll go through maybe just real quickly some of the ones that I wasn't too sure of. For example, like the Steph Curry one, I would also be happy to pair him with a Trae Young. I think I mentioned LaMelo, Donovan Mitchell, and Kyrie. Joel Embiid, I'd also be happy to pair him with like a Donovan Mitchell in that punt field goal percentage type build. Who else? Shai, I'd be happy to go with Shai or Jalen Brunson there instead of a Devin Booker. They're both kind of similar type players. I just preferred Devin Booker's free throw percentage volume, which I expect to be a little bit greater than a Brunson. I just personally think he's a little bit better of a player, and I'm more confident in him repeating, but Brunson could also be another really good option with a Shai pairing. 2 guards that don't rely on high volume threes, but really good scoring, assists, and free throw percentage is nice. Just be aware of the low blocks from a Brunson, but you're probably going to get some good blocks when you're punting threes anyway. Who else? Trae Young. You could also go Steph Curry, Trae Young. Obviously, we talked about vice versa. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of players you can obviously pick. You've seen or heard a lot of familiar and repeated names, so you're kind of getting the idea of which players I value at certain points, so there is a bit of that baked into it as well. For example, on some of these lists, when I was punting the threes, like an Evan Mobley, in my projections, jumps right up into that second round, but I think you don't have to get him there. You can get him in the third round, so I'm playing a little bit of that ADP game there as well. So let me know down in the comments section, guys, what you think. And soon we're going to be coming up with some bus videos, some sleeper videos, and some late round flyers, all in preparation for drafts, which are coming up very, very soon. Good luck with all your drafts in the future, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!